On the planet Virana, the Virani people had strict rules. One of the most important laws was that no one, no matter who they were, could fall in love with a human. It was forbidden. The history of the Virani and humans was filled with conflict, and the Virani believed that these feelings could never lead to anything good. Love between the two species had caused pain in the past, and they would not allow it again. But for Lyra, a young Virani woman, this law was about to be tested. Lyra was smart and driven. She worked as a scientist at one of the top research centers on the planet, and she was respected by her peers. But there was something about the human engineers who sometimes visited that piqued her curiosity. Their culture, their emotions, and how different they were from the Virani fascinated her. She had heard stories about humans, both good and bad, but she had never met one in person. That was until today. Lyra stood by the entrance of the research center, her eyes scanning the horizon. The sun had just set, and the sky was painted with hues of orange and purple. A group of human engineers had arrived to help with a new technology that could change the future of both species. Lyra's heart raced as she noticed a tall man with messy brown hair step out of the ship. His name was Jason. She had heard about him from the other scientists, and from what they said, he was brilliant. But it wasn't his intelligence that caught Lyra's attention. There was something about him, something that made her stomach flip. As Jason walked toward her, Lyra couldn't help but notice the way his eyes sparkled with curiosity. He wasn't like the other humans she had imagined. He was different. He smiled warmly at her as they approached each other, and she found herself smiling back. "Hi," he said, his voice warm and inviting. "I'm Jason. You must be Lyra." Lyra nodded, feeling the strange sense of calm wash over her despite the chaos of the situation. "Yes, that's me. Welcome to Virana." Jason looked around, taking in the sights of the planet. "It's beautiful here," he said, clearly impressed. "I've heard a lot about this place, but it's nothing like Earth, that's for sure." Lyra smiled at his honest comment. "It's different," she said. "We Virani have a deep connection to our land. Everything here has a purpose." Jason tilted his head, clearly intrigued. "That's fascinating. We humans are the same way, in a way. We've just learned to adapt to our surroundings." The conversation felt natural, easy. Lyra had expected to feel nervous, but instead, she felt curious. There was something about Jason's presence that made her feel comfortable. It was almost as if the world around them didn't matter for a moment. They spent the next few hours working together, talking about their respective cultures and sharing stories about their planets. Jason was incredibly kind and respectful, and it was clear he was just as curious about her as she was about him. But every now and then, Lyra would remind herself of the law. She could not fall for him. It was forbidden. Yet, despite the constant reminder in her mind, Lyra couldn't ignore the fluttering feeling in her chest. She had never experienced anything like this before. She had met other beings from different species in her life, but none had made her feel this way. The more she talked to Jason, the more she found herself drawn to him. As the day turned to night, Jason and Lyra found themselves standing together outside the research center, overlooking a field of glowing flowers. The air was cool, and the night sky sparkled with stars. For a moment, they stood in silence, simply enjoying the beauty around them. Jason glanced over at Lyra, his expression serious now. "You know, I wasn't sure what to expect when I came here," he said softly. "But this feels real. There's something about this place, about you, that makes me think I'm meant to be here." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. Her mind raced as she tried to control the emotions that were bubbling up inside her. She had to keep her distance. She couldn't let herself fall for a human. It was against everything she had been taught. But Jason's gaze held hers, and in that moment, all the laws, all the rules, seemed to fade away. She felt a pull, something she couldn't explain, and despite her best efforts, she found herself stepping closer to him. "Lyra," Jason whispered. She didn't answer. She couldn't. But the space between them closed, and for a brief second, their hands brushed together. It was a simple touch, but it sent a shock through her. The warmth of his skin, the softness of his touch, it felt like something she had always longed for. Her breath caught in her throat as she looked up at him, her heart racing. She wanted to pull away, to retreat into her old life, but she couldn't. There was something about this man, about the way he made her feel, that made all the rules seem irrelevant. Lyra began, but the words caught in her throat. She had no idea what to say, no idea how to explain what she was feeling. Jason smiled gently, as if he understood. "It's okay," he said quietly. "I know this isn't easy, but I don't want to fight it." In that moment, Lyra knew this was just the beginning. She had no idea where this would lead, but one thing was certain. Her life, her world, was about to change forever. Over the next few days, Lyra found herself unable to focus. Every time she walked into the research center, her thoughts would drift back to the brief touch of Jason's hand. The warmth of it, the electricity between them, it all lingered in her mind. She tried to push it aside, to remind herself that this was wrong, but it was like trying to ignore a storm brewing inside her. Lyra knew the law. She had grown up with it, taught to respect it, and now it felt like a heavy weight on her chest. No Viewerani could fall in love with a human. It was forbidden, and for good reason. The history between their species was dark, filled with battles, misunderstandings, and pain. She had heard the stories, and she believed in the law because it was meant to protect them all. But none of that seemed to matter when she was with Jason. The next time she met Jason, it was in the lab, where they were working on an important project together. Lyra stood by a large table filled with alien technology, studying the data. Jason was beside her, his eyes scanning the screens in front of him. She could feel his presence, and it distracted her more than she wanted to admit. Jason looked over at her, his expression curious. "So how did you end up working with this technology?" he asked, his voice light. Lyra shook her head, trying to focus on the task at hand. "It's a family tradition," she said, trying to make it sound casual. "My family has always worked with new tech. It's in my blood." Jason smiled, his eyes sparkling with interest. "That's amazing. You must know so much about it." Lyra felt a small smile tug at her lips. "I suppose I do. But it's not just about knowledge. It's about understanding how it can change things, change the future." For a moment, there was a pause, and their eyes locked. The connection between them was undeniable, as if an invisible thread was pulling them closer. Lyra quickly looked away, not wanting to show how much she was affected by him. Jason cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "I think you're right. This could change everything. The way humans and Viewerani interact. Maybe even the way we see each other." Lyra nodded, but her mind was no longer on the project. It was on Jason. The way he spoke, the way his voice softened when he talked about the future, it made her heart race. She had to focus. She had to keep control. But every time she looked at him, the temptation grew stronger. Over the next few days, they continued to work side by side, discussing ideas and working on the technology. They became comfortable with each other, and Lyra began to feel like she could share her thoughts freely with Jason. He was easy to talk to, and he seemed genuinely interested in her ideas. She had never met a human like him before. One evening, after a long day of work, they found themselves walking outside under the stars. The sky above them was clear, and the cool air felt refreshing after hours spent indoors. They had just finished discussing a breakthrough they had made in the research when Jason turned to Lyra, his expression serious. "Lyra," he began softly, his voice low, "I know we're from different worlds, but I can't help how I feel. I think about you all the time, and I don't think this is just curiosity anymore. It feels like something more." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She wanted to say something, wanted to explain how dangerous this was, but the words got stuck in her throat. The temptation to be close to him, To explore whatever this feeling was too strong. She couldn't deny it anymore. Lyra started, but her voice faltered. She looked away, trying to gather her thoughts. I feel the same way, she admitted quietly. Her heart pounded in her chest as she spoke, every word carrying the weight of the law she was about to break. Jason stepped closer, his hand brushing lightly against hers. The simple touch sent a spark through her body, and she couldn't help but shiver. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with confusion and longing. I don't want to hurt you, Lyra, Jason said softly, his voice sincere. But I don't want to ignore what I feel either. I don't know how we're supposed to make this work, but I'm willing to try. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. She knew she should walk away, tell him this was a mistake, but the thought of losing him was unbearable. She had never felt this way before, not for anyone. I don't know if it can work, she whispered, her voice trembling. The law. It's not just a rule. It's our history, our protection. It's all we've known. Jason nodded, his expression understanding but determined. I get it, but maybe it's time for a change. Maybe we can make a new history. Together. For a moment, Lyra stood there, her heart torn between her duty and her desire. She had always followed the rules, always believed in the law. But standing here with Jason, she realized that some things were worth breaking the rules for. The moment stretched on, both of them standing silently under the stars. The weight of the world seemed to hang between them, but for Lyra, there was no turning back. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing. She couldn't stay away from him. And as Jason reached for her hand, she let him. The days that followed were filled with tension, excitement, and fear. Lyra tried to focus on her work, but every time she saw Jason, her thoughts would scatter, her heart racing. She couldn't ignore the pull she felt toward him. The touch of his hand, the warmth of his voice, everything about him made her feel alive in a way she had never experienced. But at the same time, she knew that their connection could never be more than a fleeting moment. The law, her people's traditions, and their entire history forbade it. The truth was, Lyra wasn't the only one struggling with the growing attraction. Jason, too, was finding it harder to ignore the chemistry between them. He had always respected the boundaries set by their cultures, but with each passing day, it became harder to keep his feelings in check. He couldn't help but feel like something deep inside him was pulling him toward Lyra, something that went beyond the research they were working on. One evening, after a long day at the lab, Lyra and Jason sat outside on a balcony overlooking the glowing city. The lights of Verana reflected off the glass buildings, casting a soft glow around them. Jason was leaning against the railing, looking at the stars, while Lyra sat beside him, her mind far away. "You've been quiet today," Jason said, glancing at her. "Is everything okay?" Lyra looked at him, startled out of her thoughts. She smiled weakly. "I'm just tired," she said, though that wasn't the whole truth. The real reason she felt distant was that she was battling with herself, with the part of her that wanted to push Jason away and the part that longed to be close to him. "I understand," Jason said, his voice softer now. "I know I've probably been a bit forward, but I need you to know that I care about you, and I can't pretend that I don't." Lyra felt a pang of guilt in her chest. She knew this was more than just a passing attraction for him. She could see it in his eyes, in the way he spoke, the way he looked at her when she wasn't paying attention. The problem was, she couldn't pretend it wasn't real for her either. "I care about you too," Lyra admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "But I can't do this, Jason. We can't do this." Jason turned to face her, his expression confused and hurt. "Why? What's stopping us?" Lyra felt her heart race. She knew she couldn't keep avoiding the truth, not forever. She took a deep breath before speaking. "My people have a law, Jason. A law that says no Virani can have a relationship with a human. It's forbidden." Jason's face grew serious as he processed her words. "I know about the law," he said quietly. But that's just a rule, right? It's not the truth about us, about what we feel. We can't let something like that stop us. Lyra closed her eyes, shaking her head. You don't understand. It's not just a rule. It's part of who we are. It's been that way for centuries. We can't change it. Jason stepped closer to her, his eyes full of determination. But why should it control us? We're not the same as we were centuries ago. Things can change. We can make things better. We can have something real. Lyra. Lyra looked away, unable to meet his gaze. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that love could be enough to break through centuries of tradition. But deep down, she knew the risks were too great. If anyone found out about their feelings, it could mean the end of everything she had worked for, everything her family had built. You don't know what's at stake, Lyra said softly, her voice filled with emotion. If we're caught, I could lose everything. My family, my place in society, my entire future. Jason reached out, gently touching her arm. His touch was warm, grounding. I don't want you to lose anything, Lyra. I want to help you. But you have to let me in. We can figure this out together. For a moment, Lyra felt torn. The temptation to be with Jason was so strong, but the consequences of their love were just as powerful. She knew that if they continued down this path, it wouldn't be long before someone noticed. Someone who would enforce the law. Someone who would ruin everything they had. But then she thought about Jason's words. Could they really make this work? Could they change the rules, change the future? Was she willing to risk everything for a chance at happiness? As if reading her mind, Jason spoke again. We don't have to decide everything right now, but I don't want you to keep running from me. We deserve to be happy, Lyra. The words hit her harder than she expected. She had spent so much time running from her feelings, so much time convincing herself that this could never work. But now, standing here with Jason, she realized something. She wasn't running anymore. She was simply afraid. I don't know if I'm ready to break the law, Jason, Lyra whispered, her voice filled with uncertainty. But I know I don't want to walk away from you. Jason smiled softly. Then we'll take it one step at a time. Together. Lyra looked into his eyes, her heart racing once more. For the first time, she allowed herself to hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to make this work. The days that followed were filled with a mix of excitement and fear. Lyra tried to focus on her work, but the weight of her feelings for Jason hung heavily over her every moment. She could no longer pretend that this was just a passing attraction. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. But every time she saw Jason, every time he smiled at her, the world felt a little less heavy, a little more hopeful. However, not everyone shared the same hope. The whispers started as soon as Lyra and Jason began to spend more time together. At first, it was just a few curious looks, a few hushed conversations when they thought no one was listening. But soon, the rumors began to spread. Lyra tried to ignore it. She focused on her work and kept her conversations with Jason as professional as possible. But every glance, every whispered word, was a reminder of the danger they were in. She knew that if anyone found out about their feelings, the consequences would be severe. And yet, every time Jason looked at her, the temptation to be close to him became harder to resist. One evening, as Lyra walked through the corridors of the research center, she felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to see her closest friend, Sira, standing behind her. Sira's face was serious, her expression filled with concern. Lyra, Sira said quietly, I need to talk to you. Lyra's heart sank. She knew what was coming. Sira had always been a good friend, but she also knew the rules better than anyone. She wouldn't let Lyra get away with breaking them. What is it, Sira? Lyra asked, trying to sound calm. Sira's voice was low, filled with worry. I've heard the rumors, Lyra. I know what's going on between you and Jason. Lyra's stomach twisted. She had hoped that no one would find out. She had hoped she could keep her secret safe for just a little while longer. But it was too late. I didn't mean for it to happen, Lyra began, her voice shaking slightly. It's not that simple. Sira sighed, her eyes softening. I know, but you have to understand the danger, Lyra. If anyone finds out, the council will not hesitate. They'll banish you, and Jason, he could be killed. Lyra closed her eyes, the weight of her friend's words hitting her like a punch to the gut. She had known the risks, but hearing them out loud made them real in a way she hadn't been able to grasp before. She had always known the law was there to protect them, to keep their society from falling apart. But now she felt trapped by it, and there was no easy way out. I don't want to hurt anyone, Lyra whispered, her voice barely above a breath. But I can't stop what I feel. Sira placed a hand on Lyra's arm. I understand. But this isn't just about your feelings anymore. This is about your future. You can't be with him. Not like this. Not without consequences. Lyra looked away, her heart heavy. She knew Sira was right, but she couldn't help herself. She didn't want to lose Jason. She didn't want to lose the one person who made her feel like she mattered, who made her feel alive. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that she was putting both of them in danger. If they continued down this path, it could ruin everything. That night, Lyra lay awake in her bed, staring up at the ceiling, the weight of her thoughts pressing down on her. She had always been a rule follower. She had always believed in the importance of the laws that kept their society intact. But now she felt torn. She loved Jason, and she didn't know how to let him go. And yet, the thought of breaking the law seemed like a betrayal, a destruction of everything her people had worked for. The next day, things took a turn for the worse. As Lyra and Jason worked together in the lab, a tall figure appeared in the doorway. It was one of the high-ranking officials of the Viewership Council. His eyes immediately swept over the room, landing on Lyra and Jason. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She knew exactly what this meant. Lyra, the official said, his voice cold. I need to speak with you. Now. Jason looked at Lyra, his expression full of confusion and concern. But Lyra could only nod, her stomach sinking. This was it. The moment they had been avoiding had arrived. The official led her down the long corridor to a private room. Lyra's mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, but she kept her face neutral. She couldn't afford to show any weakness now. When they entered the room, the official closed the door behind them and turned to face her. His eyes were sharp, filled with a cold, unforgiving authority. It has come to our attention, Lyra, he began, his voice low and serious, that you have been breaking the law. You have formed a bond with a human. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know how they had found out, but it didn't matter. The truth was out, and there was no escaping it now. The official's eyes narrowed. You know the consequences of your actions. You will be removed from your position, and you will be exiled from Verana. If the human is involved, he will be punished as well. Lyra's world felt like it was crumbling around her. Exiled. Her entire life, everything she had worked for, could be destroyed because of one decision. But she didn't regret it. Not for a second. The news of Lyra's punishment spread quickly through the research center. The Viewership Council had made it clear that Lyra had broken a law that could not be ignored. Exile. Banishment. It was the harshest sentence a Viewership could receive. But to Lyra, it felt like a death sentence. She had known the risk of her actions, but hearing the consequences made everything more real, more painful. Jason, who had been her closest ally, stood beside her, his face full of worry and frustration. He couldn't believe that their love, their bond, could lead to such a punishment. I won't let them do this to you, Lyra, Jason said fiercely as they sat together in the quiet of her apartment later that evening. There's got to be a way to change this. Lyra shook her head, her heart heavy with the weight of the situation. I don't know, Jason. The law is too strong. The council is too powerful. They won't listen to us. Jason took her hand in his, squeezing it gently. Then we make them listen. Lyra looked at him, her eyes wide. What do you mean? Jason stood up, his face filled with determination. We can't just let this happen. I've met people here, Virani, who feel the same way we do. They believe in change. If we can gather enough support, if we can show the council that we're not alone in this, we might have a chance. Lyra was silent for a long time, her mind racing. The thought of fighting against the council, of challenging centuries of tradition, terrified her. But at the same time, she couldn't stand the idea of losing Jason, of losing everything they had fought for. How do we even begin? She asked quietly. We start small, Jason replied. We find others who are willing to speak up. People who think the law is wrong, who believe in the future more than the past. We build a movement, one step at a time. Lyra nodded slowly. It sounded dangerous. It sounded impossible. But in her heart, she knew there was no other choice. They couldn't keep hiding. They couldn't keep pretending their love didn't exist. Over the next few weeks, Lyra and Jason worked in secret, reaching out to trusted individuals who might help them. They met quietly in dark corners of the research center, whispering plans to each other, careful not to attract attention. Slowly, they found others who were ready to fight. Some were high-ranking scientists, others were ordinary citizens, but they all shared the same belief. The law was unjust. One evening, after a long day of secret meetings, Lyra found herself alone in a secluded part of the city. The stars were bright in the sky above her, and she felt a sense of peace, even in the chaos of everything happening around her. But that peace didn't last long. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see a figure approaching in the shadows. At first, she was scared, but when the figure stepped into the light, she saw it was Sira. Her friend's face was filled with concern, but also something else, something like determination. I've been hearing things, Lyra, Sira said quietly, her voice shaky. I know what you and Jason are planning. Lyra's heart sank. She had hoped that Sira wouldn't find out, that she wouldn't be part of this. But now, standing in front of her, Sira's expression told her that her friend had already made up her mind. I don't want to lose you, Lyra, Sira continued, her voice soft but firm. But what you're doing, it's dangerous. If you go through with this, there's no turning back. Lyra felt a lump form in her throat. I know, she whispered, but I can't just sit back and let them tear us apart. Jason and I, we deserve a chance. We deserve to be together. Sira sighed deeply, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. I've always known you were strong, Lyra, but this is more than just your future. It's everyone's future. If the council catches wind of this, there's no telling how far they'll go. For a moment, there was silence between them. Lyra thought about what Sira had said. The risks were high, and the consequences would be severe, but the love she felt for Jason, the life they could have together, was worth the risk. I'm not going to stop, Lyra said quietly, her voice filled with resolve. I've made my choice. Sira looked at her for a long time before nodding slowly. Then I'll help you. I'll do whatever I can to help you and Jason. Lyra's heart swelled with gratitude. She had never expected this. She had never expected her friend to stand by her side, to help her fight for something that seemed so impossible. But here she was, ready to fight for what was right. The rebellion had begun. As Lyra and Sira made their way back to the meeting point, where Jason and the others were waiting, Lyra felt a new sense of purpose. She wasn't alone anymore. They had allies now, people who believed in them and in the possibility of change. This wasn't just about her and Jason anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been silenced by the laws of the past. It was about the future and the possibility that love could conquer all. The battle was just beginning, and Lyra knew they had a long fight ahead of them. But for the first time, she felt like they might actually win. They might just change the world. The days following their decision to fight back felt like a blur to Lyra. She had never imagined herself in a position like this, defying the very laws that had shaped her life. But as she worked with Jason, Sira, and the growing group of rebels, she started to feel a sense of hope. For the first time, she believed that change might be possible. Every meeting, every plan, was more dangerous than the last. They had to be careful, secretive, because the Virani Council's eyes were everywhere. But the rebels were determined. More people joined their cause each day, some out of loyalty to Lyra, others because they too believed the law was wrong. They wanted a new future, one where love wasn't dictated by old rules. But despite the growing support, Lyra knew that time was running out. The council had already made their judgment. Lyra's punishment was set, and if they didn't act soon, it would be too late. She felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Could they really change things? Could they truly challenge centuries of tradition? One night, as Lyra and Jason stood together in their hiding place, their voices barely above a whisper, Jason looked at her with determination in his eyes. "We don't have much time, Lyra," he said quietly. "The council is getting closer to finding out what we're doing. We have to act fast." Lyra nodded, but the fear in her chest was growing. The council's power was vast, and their hold on Virani society was unbreakable. What if they failed? What if everything they fought for crumbled before them? "What if we can't do it?" Lyra asked, her voice tinged with doubt. "What if we can't change anything?" Jason placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch reassuring. "We're already changing things, Lyra. Look at how far we've come. We've made people believe in us. We've made them believe in the future. But the council won't let us go that easily," Lyra said, her voice tight with worry. "They'll do everything in their power to stop us." Jason's eyes softened, his gaze meeting hers. "We'll find a way. Together." The next day, the rebel group gathered in secret. Tension filled the air as Lyra looked around at the faces of those who had joined their cause. They were nervous but determined, just like her. The plan was simple, but dangerous. They would storm the council's chambers and present their case. They would show the council that they weren't just a few rebellious individuals. They were the voice of the future. Lyra stood at the front of the group, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never felt more scared in her life, but she also felt something else: determination. This was her chance to fight for what she believed in, for the love she and Jason shared. She couldn't let fear stop her now. "We have to do this," she said, her voice steady. "We have to show them that we're not going to live in the shadows anymore. That we deserve the chance to love, just like everyone else." Jason stepped forward beside her, his expression serious but supportive. "We're doing this for all of us. For the future. For love." With that, they made their way to the council's chambers, their steps quick and purposeful. They had to move fast. Every second counted. As they entered the grand hall, the air was thick with tension. The council members were already seated, their cold eyes scanning the group of rebels. Lyra's heart skipped a beat as she realized the gravity of what they were doing. "Lyra," one of the council members said, his voice low and stern, "what is this madness? You are breaking the laws of our people, laws that have kept us safe for centuries. Do you truly think you can change everything with a few words?" Lyra stood tall, her hands shaking, but her voice strong. "I don't think we can change everything with words," she said. "But I believe we can change the future. This law is hurting us. It's keeping us from being who we truly are. We are human and Virani, and we deserve to choose who we love." The council members exchanged uneasy glances. Lyra could see the doubt in their eyes, but she knew they wouldn't change their stance easily. They had to do more than speak. They had to show that their cause was bigger than just them. Sira stepped forward, her voice calm but filled with conviction. "We are not just a few people breaking the law. We are a movement. We are the future, and we will not be silenced." Jason, standing beside Lyra, added his voice to the growing chorus. "This law has caused nothing but pain. We want a future where we can love who we want, where love isn't limited by outdated rules." The room fell silent. The council members sat back, their expressions unreadable. Lyra's heart was pounding in her chest as she waited for their response. This was the moment. They had no more time to waste. Finally, one of the council members spoke. "You dare to challenge us. You dare to defy centuries of tradition." Lyra stepped forward, her eyes locking with his. "Yes," she said, her voice filled with confidence. "Because we believe in a better future, a future where love is not forbidden, a future where we can be free." The council was silent for a long moment. Lyra held her breath, hoping against hope that they would listen. Finally, the head of the council stood, his face unreadable. "You have made your case," he said, his voice low and serious. "And we will consider it." Lyra's heart raced. This wasn't over. Not yet. But for the first time, she felt a spark of hope. They had made their voices heard. And maybe, just maybe, things were starting to change. The days after the meeting with the council passed slowly, each one dragging as Lyra and Jason waited for the council's decision. The weight of uncertainty hung heavily in the air. They had made their case, but they didn't know if it would be enough. Lyra spent most of her time with Jason, trying to remain hopeful. But there were moments when doubt crept in, moments when she questioned if they were really capable of changing the law, of breaking the centuries-old tradition that had controlled their society for so long. But every time she looked at Jason, she felt the same burning desire to make things right. He was her strength, her hope, and together they had started something that couldn't be undone. One evening, as the sun began to set, Lyra sat with Jason by the glowing river that ran through the city. The peaceful sound of the water flowing calmed her, but the restlessness inside her remained. "We've done everything we can," Jason said, breaking the silence. His voice was soft, but there was a calm determination in it that Lyra admired. "Now we just have to wait. Whatever happens, we made our stand." Lyra nodded, her heart heavy. "I know, but what if it's not enough? What if the council doesn't listen?" Jason turned to face her, his eyes soft yet strong. "We can't control what they decide, Lyra, but we can control how we've lived. We stood up for what's right. We fought for our love. And that's more than most would have ever done." She looked up at him, her heart swelling with emotion. She had never expected to be here, to be fighting for something like this. But she was here, with Jason, and it felt like they had already won, no matter what the outcome would be. The next morning, Lyra was called to the council chambers again. Her heart raced as she walked through the familiar corridors, each step echoing in the silence of the stone walls. She had been here before, but this time felt different. This time, everything could change. When she entered the grand hall, the council was already seated, their expressions unreadable. She took a deep breath, standing tall in front of them. Jason stood at her side, his presence a silent reminder of why she was here. The head of the council, the same member who had spoken to her before, looked at her with an expression that was both stern and curious. He didn't speak right away, making Lyra feel the weight of his gaze. Finally, he stood. "Lyra," he said, his voice cold and commanding, "you and your supporters have presented a powerful case. You have spoken of love, of freedom, of change, and we have listened." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected them to admit it so openly. The council member continued, "But we are not a people who make decisions on a whim. Our traditions have kept us safe for centuries. To change them is not something we take lightly." Lyra took a deep breath, preparing herself. She had come this far. She couldn't back down now. "I understand," she said, her voice steady. "But the law, the traditions, they have caused pain. We cannot live in fear any longer. We cannot hide who we are. We want to live in a world where love is not forbidden." The room was silent as the council members exchanged looks. Lyra's pulse raced. This was it. She didn't know what they would decide, but she couldn't regret what she had done. The head of the council stepped forward, his eyes focused on Lyra. "After much consideration," he said slowly, "we have decided to make a change. We will not banish you or your human partner, Lyra. Instead, we will revise the law. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. She had never dared to imagine that the council would actually listen, that they would actually change the law. But here they were, offering a chance. However, the council member added, his tone still serious, "This change will not be easy. We will start by allowing human-Varani relationships, but only if both parties are willing to commit to the future together. It will be a trial period, and only time will tell if it will be successful." Lyra felt a flood of emotions, relief, disbelief, and even fear. This was a beginning, but it was far from a perfect solution. There would still be those who opposed the change, and the risks would remain. But for the first time, she could see a future where she and Jason could be together without fear. "Thank you," Lyra said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for giving us this chance. We will prove that we can make this work." Jason squeezed her hand, his eyes filled with the same gratitude and disbelief. "This isn't the end," he said quietly. "It's just the beginning." The council nodded, their decision made. Lyra and Jason left the chambers, their hearts lighter than they had been in days. The air felt different now, as though the future was opening up before them. As they walked through the city, hand in hand, the sun set behind them, casting a warm glow over the horizon. Lyra couldn't help but smile. They had won. Not completely, not yet, but they had opened the door to something new, something hopeful. And together, they would walk through it.